Today, we're going to dive into a guide written for the ultimate skeptic, and it comes from a place you might not expect, the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a spiritual path specifically for those of us who find the whole idea of faith, well, kind of impossible. Okay, so here's the journey we're about to take. It's laid out in 5 parts. We'll start with the core problem, what's called the agnostic's dilemma. Then we'll look at why it's okay to have doubts, find a new way to think about a higher power, use a little logic, and see how it all leads to some pretty revolutionary changes. Let's get into it.
All right, so right off the bat, we're faced with a really stark choice. For someone who's in a truly hopeless situation, the solution that's offered can feel completely and utterly out of reach.
The choice is laid out in pretty black and white terms. You can continue down this path towards what's called an alcoholic death, or you can choose a life lived on a spiritual basis. Now, for someone who doesn't believe, that second option doesn't just feel hard, it can feel like a total non-starter.
So what's the real issue here? Why is this so hard? The book argues it's because our own willpower, all our human resources, have already failed. The problem we're facing isn't a lack of trying. It's a fundamental lack of power.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. After presenting this spiritual solution that seems so impossible, the book does something kind of brilliant. Instead of just demanding that you believe, it actually validates all the reasons why belief is so difficult in the first place.
And look, this is not a new struggle. The text points out that about half of its own first members were skeptics, just like us. So right away, you get this sense that, okay, you're not alone in feeling this way.
And it gets right into the weeds, you know? It lists out all these powerful, totally logical reasons for skepticism. It talks about the hypocrisy we see, how hard it is to believe in a loving God when there's so much chaos, and the simple fact that how can you even begin to understand a supreme being?
And that right there, that's the key. The text isn't judging these doubts or treating them like character flaws. It's sharing them. It's building this bridge and basically saying, hey, we get it. We've been there too.
Okay, so this brings us to a real turning point. After setting up the problem and making it clear that our doubts are understood, the book offers this incredibly flexible, really personal way to approach the whole spiritual idea.
Here is the big shift. We're told we don't have to buy into anyone else's idea of God. The only thing that's asked is that we form our own idea, our own conception, even if it feels incomplete or kind of vague. That's enough. That's the starting point.
It all boils down to this one question. This is the only thing we really need to ask ourselves to get started. It's just a simple check-in. Do we believe, or are we maybe just willing to believe in some kind of power greater than ourselves?
And the incredible thing is the text reassures us that the moment we can say yes, or even just admit that we're willing to believe, we're on our way. That tiny little opening is the cornerstone for everything else.
Okay, but wait. If you're a logical person, you might be thinking, how do I square this willingness with my rational mind? Well, the book has an answer for that. It suggests we use the exact same kind of reasoning we use every day in the modern world.
Think about something like electricity. We believe in it, right? We flip a switch, the light comes on. We use it every day. But we don't need to actually see the electrons flowing to accept that it's real. We start with a reasonable assumption because it explains the results we can see. But maybe an even better example, a really powerful one, is the story of early aviation. It's this perfect metaphor for breaking through a barrier that everyone thought was impossible, all because of a small shift in belief. So the comparison is pretty direct, isn't it? Our stubborn insistence that we can solve everything on our own, it's just like those experts who proved a flying machine was impossible. The Wright brothers made it happen because they started with the faith that it could be done, and they flew in the face of all the so-called logic of their time.
All right, so we've talked about theory and logic, but where's the proof?
The text argues that the real evidence isn't in an argument, it's in the results. It's in the massive, life-altering changes that people actually went through. To make this real, a pretty dramatic story is shared about a minister's son. This was a man who was completely soured on religion from a young age, beaten down by life, and was right on the edge of total collapse.
And then, at his absolute lowest point, alone in a hospital room after screaming out in bitterness, this one thought just hits him like a thunderbolt. It wasn't a voice he heard. It was a question that popped into his own mind and just took over everything.
And what's described here isn't some intellectual debate he had with himself. It's described as this overwhelming experience. He felt this flood of what's called an infinite power and love, and all the mental walls he'd built up over a lifetime just came crashing down.
So, this incredible transformation,
is laid out as the result of a pretty simple chain of events. His terrible situation just made him willing to believe. He made a simple, humble offering of himself, and the result was a total change and a recovery that the book calls a miracle.
And that's where we're left, with this final, really thought-provoking question. We've seen that our own best ideas, our own willpower, just didn't work. And we've seen that this other idea seemed to work for people just like us. So the final thought is, what's the real harm in being as open-minded about this one thing as we are about everything else?